What I was going to ask about Elon Musk is, I was trying to think of a historical parallel to Elon Musk, and I can't do it. I was trying my best because I can think of a lot of rich people who were involved in government, Carnegie, Rockefeller, JP Morgan, Vanderbilt, stuff. And they, of course, used their influence and their wealth to shape their industries in the way they want and the culture. So like Henry Ford did a lot with culture and everything. I can't think of anyone who's done it to the extent that Elon Musk has, where like half of the country didn't worship Henry Ford, right? Even though all the power he had. Can you think of anyone who's come close to this?
I can't. I think Henry Ford is an interesting analogy just because he was also super, super racist and had all these weird, anti-Semitic theories. And I think even Hitler mentioned Henry Ford by name in one of his books or whatever. So I do think that Henry Ford's a similar figure. But like you said, nowhere near that kind of power and leverage over the government, and nowhere near that kind of, fame and admiration among the people. And right, you're right. I'm going through, even when I go through like stuff outside of America, like just Rome and Greece and everything, I really can't think of at least a well-known similarity to a figure who's very similar to Elon Musk. But I do want to say this. You said that people like respect Elon Musk, or like the people who love him because he's rich. It's also because he's rich and he says things that they agree with. Because if you're rich and you say things that they don't agree with, well, then you're a part of the cabal. You're a part of the Hollywood this or that. You're a part of the deep state or whatever. But if you're rich and you're working those exact same industries, but you say conservative things, well, then it's like, oh, well, this person should be the leader of the free world. This person should have all the power and control, and we're not going to question anything they're doing. And what's so weird about Elon Musk is that, a lot of the things that his organization is Doge, whatever it is. I mean, the fact that it's even called Doge, it's like that within itself is just like a clear-cut example that it's a farce. That none of this is legitimate. This is a name that's been associated with his brand for years. So this is just Trump's way of rewarding Musk for giving Trump a few extra votes that he would have needed to win the election. And the things that he's targeting, like all the things that he's targeting, are either scientific institutions, things like NOAA, things like NASA, things like the FAA, or he's targeting things for these weird political ideological reasons, like the U.S. aid, where the humanitarian aid that we're giving to other countries, targeting FEMA, which is like considering how bad climate change is about to get, I don't think that's the thing you need to be targeting right now. Targeting the DEI initiatives, and then of course the Department of Education, which again would just be disastrous for most Americans, including the vast majority of the red state Americans who supported Trump in the first place. So what's so crazy to me is that he's not even targeting like the actual areas of waste in our government. Like if he wanted to target the actual areas of waste in our government, it starts and ends with the Pentagon. Like audit the Pentagon, target that, and you could easily find about $1 trillion missing dollars right there or close to it, right? That's not even on the radar. Like he's only targeting things based off of these ideological concerns. And what's also weird about it is just like all these people, USAID aside, like that may be the one thing that's like international aid that he's targeting. But everything else he's targeting deals with like things that we as Americans use on a domestic level. And so these are the same people who say things like, we give too much of our money away to Ukraine. We give too much of our money away to Israel. That money should be here in America. It's like, okay, he's targeting the institutions that's using that money for Americans. Department of Education, Medicaid, Medicare, food assistance. These are things that we use as Americans, and these are the things you're cheering for him to defund or cut funding for. And it's like, what are we even talking about here? Like, I don't understand. The cognitive dissonance is just so strong. I don't understand why people don't see how this is going to adversely affect them far more than not. I don't get it.
It is odd. That's I wanted to talk about the Henry Ford thing you mentioned before I get in on this. What Corey was saying there about how Henry Ford was racist. Now, I wouldn't fault people for not knowing that. It's not like you're taught that in school. In school, you're taught that Henry Ford created the car or whatever. He didn't, but that's kind of what people think, and that he was the first one to make use of the assembly line that we know and love today to make work more efficient. And he paid people a lot of money, and so they could buy his equipment, which is really funny. You start looking at there before they don't teach you shit like I didn't do this in school. I went to a private school, but I guess in a lot of public schools, they taught square dancing back in the day. Like I talked to people. Yeah, a lot of people I talked to. Yeah, I didn't, because I just read an article on this and I brought it up. And some people on other podcasts like, oh yeah, they taught us square dancing in school. I didn't know public schools taught square dancing, but that can be traced back to Henry Ford, because Henry Ford did not like the influence of jazz. And he said that, jazz is poisoning the mind of kids. We need to teach them good old American square dancing. And apparently a lot of schools did it, at least until the 90s. Maybe they still do. But when people I knew were kids, that they were doing it. But Henry Ford also wrote this book called The International Jew, the World's Foremost Problem. So that is just the title. All right. It doesn't get any better from there. Okay. So if you're wondering what Corey meant about Henry Ford being a little racist, yeah, he was. And so, yeah, like absolute bigots having a lot of influence in the White House and in culture. Nothing new, but nothing to the extent of Elon Musk. Unless you count the founding fathers. Like that is honestly, I thought about it. I was like, the only parallels I can think would be like Thomas Jefferson or George Washington, where you had people with immense wealth, more than anyone else in the area, who were also vital in shaping the course of American society. But Jesus Christ, at least with Thomas Jefferson, you can point to some really good things, like writing the Virginia Statute on Religious Freedom, which was like the foundation of our First Amendment. Great. Show me something Elon Musk has done that matches anything like that. Doge, man, this is like, I'm so glad you brought that up, because all I can think is I see what's on the news and I see stuff happening. And I swear to God, like a dozen times this last month, I remember thinking, okay, is this real? Am I dreaming? Am I in a coma and someone's trying to wake me up? Like Doge, a lot of people may not even remember what Doge was. It's just this meme of this Japanese dog. And it was a cute meme, But Elon Musk's like, no, actually, I'm going to take this, because Elon Musk's mind is stuck 15 years ago. Everything he does, he's obsessed with shit from, the past, like iRobot. All of his stuff looks like iRobot and everything like that. So it's just so fucking lame. And then you'll see Donald Trump. I saw like an official White House release, like with the presidential seal on it and the White House in the background. And it said, President Trump puts a stop to the DEI madness of the government. So what is that? I saw the U.S. Army retweet libs of TikTok today. The U.S. Army official Twitter page retweeted libs of TikTok. It's like we're living in an alternate, like bizarre reality. And I love that you mentioned the fact that the elites, conservatives always talk about the elites and how the elites are bad. And what I need you guys to understand is that when conservatives mention the elites, they're not talking about elites the way we talk about them. Because when we talk about elites, almost always we're talking about financial elites, economic elites, people who hold absolute power. That's not what conservatives mean. Conservatives mean cultural elites, so however they phrase that. So Elon Musk, richest man on earth, not an elite. He's not. Your librarian, she's an elitist. Like she is like actually the one at the levers of power here, because she's letting men in dresses sit and read books at that library. So that's what they don't have that set up. The red state situation. Fuck it, we're gonna go right into it. We won't wait till the end of the show, because this is like we're talking about how the dissonance between what people want and what they're getting and how they're happy about it. I saw a video by creator Superman Todd the other day, and he was talking about how with conservatives and with Trump voters and everything, they don't need to win anything, or like life doesn't need to get better for them to be happy. They just need to see the people that they don't like suffer. That's what they really want. That counts as a win to them. So sure, Trump campaigned on no tax on tips and no tax on overtime, shit like that. Nothing in the budget proposal for that. Nothing. But he did ban trans athletes from the NCAA, and they will be partying and celebrating that for months on end. They never gave a shit about grocery prices. They didn't care about any of that. They talk about, like you mentioned, foreign aid, which is like 1% of our budget, and how we should be using that here, and vote against every measure to use that here. It's horrible to see. Oh shit, I forgot the comments here. So Tree Stop says, In my experience, people's casual belief in eugenics is a gateway to other pseudoscience. I can't tell you how many times I hear poor people shouldn't have kids. That's definitely eugenics. We had a eugenics conversation. Oh my God, Corey, we had a eugenics conversation about idiocracy. Yes. And I think about that because how many times have you heard we're living in idiocracy? It's like, oh yeah, but people do have a lot of casual eugenics and stuff. They do say this thing about poor people not having kids. And there's two ways to approach this. It's like, all right, if you can't afford to have kids, it's probably a good idea, not to like hold back on it and everything. Or you can look at the overall thing that we should craft a society where poor people can have kids, or no one's poor, and that you can have kids if you want this to continue. But yeah, I don't know what to say about Elon Musk. Actually reminds me, since we're on this topic here, Elon Musk, he was sold to us as someone who was cool, like someone who was the new Tony Stark, and that's how his insane plan with all right, the Mars thing. You mentioned how he's he's named after a character of some book where a guy goes to Mars. And so, okay, I didn't know that. And is that something everybody knew but me? Okay. I hate when that happens. But he's obsessed. Like, he's always saying that if we want to save humanity, we must have colonies on other planets. We must go to Mars. And folks, if you learn one thing from this conversation today, that is a scam. Like his whole entire thing about building rockets, and privatizing our space program, and getting people to Mars. He had a prediction that I think he said we would be on Mars by 2025. I think like 10 years ago, he said that he haven't gotten these rockets off the planet without exploding or anything. It's just a scam to get money from the government. He's going to keep doing it until people realize that they're not going anywhere. So Elon Musk, like, he's someone, if you told me about him and I never saw him or saw his Twitter feed and everything, that he'd be cool. Trump is kind of the same way. Trump is like, I don't know how many times, I'm sure you heard the jokes. It's like, oh, we finally have a president who started a space force, who's like probably an atheist, and he bangs porn stars, and he's the worst president I've ever seen. But like, what do you think about like Trump and all this? Because Trump has been a fascinating figure. I mean, he's going to go down in history as one of the most studied Americans ever, which upsets me. But how could you not? That Trump is going to die a winner, which bugs me. He is like, he's going to be when the lights go out for him. He was a 2-time presidential election winner. He's going to have the undying love of tens of millions of Americans. It's not going away. And he's delivering for his people. He gets out there and he's passing all of this awful shit to thunderous applause. What is your opinion on like Trump in the history of U.S. presidency? Which is a broad question, but like, how would you describe him?
Well, first of all, I don't necessarily think that it's a 100% guarantee that Trump's going to go down as a winner because, one, I mean, we could take a look at a couple of parallels. I mean, Grover Cleveland was a 2-time non-consecutive president, did not have the best second term. Woodrow Wilson was very similar to Trump with, a lot of the racist policies, was kind of stroking out there in his last term. Not to be offensive, but I mean, he wasn't very, very much there. Second terms in general, just historically speaking, are, even going back to George Washington, second terms are rough, and they tend to be not as successful as first terms. A lot of the great U.S. presidents, from Washington to Grant to almost all of the last few 2-term presidents we've had, did not have great second terms. I mean, it's just sort of, they call it the second term curse. There's a lot that goes into that, a lot of reasons why that's the case. But Trump will probably not be immune to that. Now, will he continue to have that undying love with all of these people? Sure, that may be true. It depends on how bad things get. But that may be true, because it seems like right now it doesn't really matter how bad things are going to get. They're still going to say, they're going to either say it's not Trump's fault, or, it's all Biden's fault, even though he's not even president anymore. Like, they'll figure out a way to keep the blame away from Trump. But as far as how the history books regard Trump, that's an interesting question, because I think it'll be very similar to how the history books regard Andrew Jackson, because I think that Andrew Jackson is, in my opinion, the type of president that Trump is trying to emulate the most. I don't think he's going to quite get there, but I think that's the type of person he's trying to emulate the most. Because Andrew Jackson pretty much did the same thing Trump did, as far as like going into the government with these really strong opinions and these strong ideologies, and just taking a freaking wrecking ball to anything in government that went against those ideologies, from the Bank of the United States to any federal institution that he felt wasn't in line with his ideology. It was getting the axe, or was getting some form of the axe. And then, of course, Jackson was responsible for the Trail of Tears, displacing, hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of indigenous tribes people from the Southeast United States into the Western territories. And that's essentially what Trump is trying to do with undocumented people and migrants and illegal immigrants. He's trying his hardest to do something very similar to that. I don't. You saw the story the other day where he's talking about, like, using Guantanamo Bay to house over 30,000 migrants, which is like Guantanamo Bay at its height only housed like maybe 700 or so enemy combatants. You're trying to put 30,000 migrants there, and why? Is it the whole purpose to like send these people back to their home countries? Why would you send them to Cuba? Like, they're not all from Cuba. Most of them aren't from Cuba. What is this? Like that's just like literal Nazi shit. Like, you're just trying to create internment camps and possibly even concentration camps. Like, there's no other purpose. If your whole purpose is to keep these people out, why are we holding them indefinitely? That doesn't make any sense. So I think he's really trying his hardest to try to imitate like an Andrew Jackson approach, a very hard-nosed, strong-arm, strongman approach to governance that's not really going to work. I mean, it might work, unfortunately, but it probably won't work. As far as how the history books look at him, I think it'll be like Andrew Jackson. I mean, Andrew Jackson is somebody we put on the $20 bill. A lot of people for a long time, in history classes, we were always taught that he was a strong leader. Yep. And then you get older and you do your research and you're like, this guy was fucking awful as a human being. Like, one of the absolute worst, if not the worst human being to ever be president. And I think it also deals with different eras because, recently a couple months ago, I went to the Ulysses S. Grant Presidential Library Museum. I did some videos for them. And it was like, there was a period where Grant was seen as a terrible president. Yeah. But only because of like the Southern lost cause mythology that made him seem like a terrible president because of his actions during Reconstruction. And then when you get into a certain era where you see the need for things like Reconstruction, you see the need for things like civil rights, then you look back at Grant and you're like, well, actually, he actually tried to do a lot of really helpful things. And I think that's what Trump's, I think it depends on the time period. If we're in a time period where conservatism and traditionalism and that kind of mentality is in control, then yeah, those individuals will probably see Trump as a champion. But if we're in a time period where, and I don't know if America will ever have this time period again, but a time period where intellectualism and rational thought is at the forefront of things, then, I mean, Trump will be seen as probably like, a stain on our history, at the very least. So I think it just depends on the time period. It just depends on what America turns into. But I think overall, he will always be a very complicated figure because there will be those who will always love him and there will be those who will always hate him. And there's not going to be a lot of middle ground. There's not going to be a lot of people who are just like, he was all right. Like, there's not going to be a lot of people who could have that opinion, that middle, like, oh yeah, he was middle of the road presidency. No, it's not going to be. You either love him or hate him, and that's going to be it.
Corey, you say that, but I would. So if you would have said this to me October of last year, I would be inclined to agree with you. But the fact that there were so many people who just didn't vote at all, it's like, Harris, Trump, I don't know. They say that. I think a lot of people do think that. I mean, the election last year was a rare moment where I had to just look myself in the eyes like, whoa, were you wrong on this? You fucked that up bad, man. I mean, as a guy who's almost never wrong, that was a weird situation to be in. And to say that, I always said that, no matter how bad this nation is, like, come on, we're better than this. And it turns out we are not. It turns out we aren't. It turns out that, like Donald Trump you can't even use like the excuse from 2016 where Trump was a new person. Donald Trump has been the most famous person in the Western Hemisphere for 10 years now. And people still said, yep, let's go. So I don't know, at least as it sits, a lot of people don't have a strong. I mean, I would figure they would. Of course, I think I do. Everyone I know does, but that's kind of odd. You said that Trump wants to be like Andrew Jackson. And he has said that. Like, I remember his first term, I think he had a picture of Jackson in the Oval Office. I don't know if he does this term, but he always mentioned that Andrew Jackson was the president that he tried to be like, which makes sense that he would pick Jackson because Jackson was known, like Corey said. I remember being a kid and learning. So Andrew Jackson wanted to expel like the Seminole Indians out of Florida. And the Supreme Court said, actually, no, you can't do that. And Jackson said, well, the court has made its ruling. Now let the court enforce it. Basically like, well, you and what army is going to stop me? And as a kid, I was like, oh, that's so cool that he said that. Then I got older. I was like, oh my God, no, what the fuck? Yeah, that sounds cool and everything. But look what he did after it. Like I was such a dumb kid. I didn't get past the actual statement to look into the atrocities. But what's really strange about Trump, he wants to be like another president too. I don't know if you've seen this. William McKinley. Have you seen this?
I have heard a little bit about this. It's weird. I'll be on like TikTok live and people will always ask me, what's Trump's obsession with McKinley? And when people first started asking me that, I was like, I don't know. And I was kind of unaware of it. And then I started looking into it and I was like, this is this is really weird. I think some of it may have to do with the tariffs. McKinley was responsible for a really large tariff increase. His name was lended to a really large tariff increase. It actually happened before he was even president. I believe the McKinley tariff went into place, if I'm not mistaken, during Benjamin Harrison or something. I'm not really sure. But I know McKinley was responsible for like a huge tariff. And because Trump is trying to do tariffs, maybe that has a lot to do with it. But McKinley, it's actually very interesting that he's choosing McKinley, because McKinley is actually the beginning of the Republican Party really being a party for the wealthy. Like, that was the moment where the rich really consolidated around the Republican Party, because the Democrats at that time, there was a guy, William Jennings Bryan, was the nominee for the Democrats in 1896. And William Jennings Bryan was, he was into eugenics. He was a little racist, but he was actually, other than that, a very Bernie Sanders. Other than that, he was a very Bernie Sanders type politician. He was very much like, the poor people are being screwed, the rich people are screwing us over. We need to do this, we need to do that. It was very, very much against the rich. And the rich saw that and was like, oh shit, we got to stop this. And so they all poured their money into McKinley's campaign. And McKinley was kind of the first president to sort of buy his way into the presidency. His campaign tactics are very similar to tactics that we still use to this day, as far as like, the way they drew him, the way they framed his posters and everything was very much in line with like, whoever has the most money is going to basically win. And so it's interesting that he keeps saying McKinley. I don't even think he's like consciously understanding what he's saying. He's basically saying, I want to be the guy for the rich. That's like what he's low key saying. But I think he's looking at McKinley's, maybe some of the more traditional things and maybe some of the more economic things that McKinley was responsible for. But really, it's subconsciously sort of just more of a, I want to be the guy who supports the richest, and that's basically going to be my legacy. I mean, that's what I hear when I hear McKinley.
Yeah, I first heard him talk about McKinley on this random video I saw. He was going to like black barbershops. He was making a big push for a long time. I saw him do that. And he was sitting in one. Some guy was asking about the economy. And Donald Trump sits there and he says, well, years ago, we had a president, William McKinley. I was like, whoa, I almost dropped the phone. I was like, Donald Trump knows who William McKinley is? I mean, I was like, he's got my attention now. I can't believe this. And I don't know if he's like, someone just mentioned McKinley to him in some conversation, or if he's just for some reason been obsessed with a president that 90% of Americans couldn't name or tell you anything about. That was kind of odd to me. But also with William Jennings Bryan, William Jennings Bryan ran for president like 100 times. He ran for president like
he kept going.
He just kept running, kept getting his ass kicked and everything. And I remember like really William Jennings Bryan, he was the silver-tongued orator. I remember people saying that all the time. Yeah, I guess the guy could really give a speech. And he always said that, we shall not crucify mankind upon a cross of gold. You guys would be amazed to find out how much of American politics based on like what our currency should be based on. Should it be gold? Should it be silver? Gold and silver, fiat, and fiat, because that was the right choice. But anyway,